Oh, well, greetings, friends. I'm Danielle Smith with the Alberta Enterprise Group. And my goodness, what a week of things for us to talk about. We have the Climate Change Conference in Glasgow coming up in about 2 weeks' time. And we're beginning to see some of the messaging that is going to be coming out of that conference. Yesterday, in the what is called National Assembly in La Belle Province of Quebec, Francois Legault did exactly as we thought he would and announced that there is going to be a ban on exploration for oil and gas in the province of Quebec. He is also going to be going to the conference in Glasgow. So that's one thing that's in the backdrop. In addition, Calgary and Edmonton, well, the entire province had municipal elections, but Calgary and Edmonton elected Jyoti Gondek in Calgary, Mayor, and Amarjeet Sohi, former Liberal Natural Resources Minister in Edmonton, as their respective mayors. The only difficulty is that Mayor-elect Gondek did an interview on the Ryan Jesperson show and has created a flurry of concern in the energy sector. I know because they've all been emailing me and calling me when she talked about her first order of business being to declare a climate emergency. So we're going to talk about that as well. On top of that, last week, Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson announced that Canada was going to sign on to an international commitment to reduce methane emissions by 30%. But here's the fine print. The oil and gas sector is going to be expected to reduce emissions of methane by 75% by 2030. Now, we are nearing the end of 2021, so we're about to start 2022. And I'm just going to put it out there. Can you see that kind of dramatic reduction in methane emissions within 8 years? We're going to talk that through today. And as you know, I am an eternal optimist. I am always seeking to find the innovative solutions and the technologies that the energy sector is adopting and developing in order to meet the challenge of reducing emissions and getting to net zero, which I think is totally achievable. I think it's achievable to get to net zero in a reasonable period of time. I just question whether 8 years is a reasonable period of time, especially since it seems like we can't get anything built at all or anything approved at all in less than a decade. But that's not going to be the case for Ty Pfieffer's new proposal and new development. He is in this field. He's an energy. He owns an energy company. I would pronounce it for you, but I'm going to leave him to pronounce it because I've tried multiple times to pronounce it and I haven't been able to. But the other company that he started is a company called Perspectum. And it is drone technology. I'll let him explain it to you. But then we're also going to have Dave Yager on to cover the battery of issues that I talked about at the opening here. But in addition, he also operates a company that deals with methane emissions. So and their reduction. So since this is going to be a mandate and is coming at us very quickly, we need to understand what technologies are available because we know what the agenda of the extreme environmentalists is. The agenda of the extreme environmentalists is to shut down and keep it underground. It's the Quebec solution. And we know that there's a better solution. If we have zero emissions of methane and we capture emissions and put them back in the ground, what we often call the circular economy, that's the solution that we need to be looking at with carbon capture, utilization, and storage as well. Oh, one more thing. The public inquiry results are coming out today. Remember the commission that Steve Allen was put in charge of to look at foreign funding of environmental groups targeting our energy sector? Well, that's coming out today. I'm not sure exactly what time, but if it happens to emerge while we're on the air, we'll discuss it. Otherwise, we'll save that for another day. Okay, as I said, tons to get to. Who can believe this much can develop in the space of a week? But there you go. I'm joined now by Ty Pfieffer, who is the president and CEO of a company called Perspectum. And Ty, you have to tell us the name of your other company because I've sort of built it up. Now people are wondering what this unpronounceable company name is.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, so we've actually, my boys are actually third generation oil and gas. My wife's father was in oil and gas, so we're a long time oil and gas people. I started right out of high school before going back to university, so I've been in it for 45 years now. And so we still continue to have a private oil and gas company. It's called Syzygy.
Syzygy, thank you. What does that even mean?
Explanation as to why it's called Syzygy, you can contact our CFO, Howard Blacker. In any event, yeah, that's it's actually a big part of why we ended up in this methane mitigation drone business. So, yeah,
Perfect.
we understand the oil and gas business. We love the oil and gas business, and
Ty, I
so
noticed that when you talk, you can't hear me. So I just want to make sure that you know that if you want me to ask another question, you'll just have to pause because I was just trying to interject, and it sounds like because of just the way our cameras and audio are working, you're not able to hear me. So let me get to perspective, and let's talk a little bit about this drone technology. People can go online and check it out as well. I'll make sure that they have the URL so that they can see the video of this. But since this is also audio that goes out on a podcast, so I'll need you to be able to explain it. So tell us how you identify the methane emission problem that we have, and then we'll talk about the solution that you have. Give us a sense of the nature of the problem, because these are really aggressive targets that we signed on to years ago when Barack Obama was still president, and extremely aggressive targets that we've now heard our own environment minister announce that we've got to achieve. So tell us what the nature of the methane problem is.
Well, I'll digress for a moment. We first started looking at the drone technology and various types of technologies, and it was, quite frankly, to be able to satisfy Directive 60, which was it came out in January of 2020. That was the first year. And how this all got started was we were at a luncheon, actually, put on by the AER in it's actually 2 years ago next month. And we listened intently. And at the end of the presentation, I went up and spoke with a representative of the AER, and I said, I fully understand what you're trying to accomplish here, but I said, there's going to be some difficulties in getting some of the answers that you're looking for compliance. And he looked at me and kind of smiled, and he said, well, he said, that's true, but he said, it's people like you who are going to invent the solutions. And I thought that was rather interesting. And so we thought about it for a while, and we thought, wow, we need to be compliant. We need to come up with these answers. So is there a business opportunity here? So that's how we started. That's how we went down the rabbit hole on the drone business. And so with that in mind, we started looking at various different types of sensors, different types of drone platforms, how we were going to be able to offer ourselves in the industry a reliable but cost-effective way of identifying these emissions. So, I'll point out, they always get great press, these views of methane plumes from satellite. Well, the types of plumes that you see from satellite are much, much larger than the ones that we encounter, daily in our industry at facilities, occasionally from a leaky pipeline. So we're looking at for leaks magnitude smaller than what, for instance, satellites do. So bearing that in mind, we started looking at some of the technologies and realizing that FLIR and some of the there were some handheld solutions to spotting methane plumes. But at the end of the day, if you want to do it effectively, both from a cost standpoint, from a safety standpoint, there had to be a better solution. So that's why we went to a drone platform. And when we first started, we knew that we were going to definitely be limited by the flight times of these battery operated copter drones. So we always saw two evolution points for our company. One was to ultimately move on to a better drone platform whereby you would have longer and heavier capacity in terms of bigger jobs, but also there was going to be a point in time when these were going to have to go beyond visual line of sight. And of course, operating within the guidelines of Transport Canada, you always have to fly these smaller drones within line of sight. So those are a couple.
Ty, let me just interrupt you there. You've put so much on the table that I would just want to make sure that that we can go back and address some of this, because you know this industry very well. But for a lot of people, they're thinking, what is methane? Why is it coming out in plumes? What is the process by which that is happening? And so methane, as I understand it, is what we typically burn as natural gas. We often put it in a pipeline, and then it's what I'm using on my stove. But it also leaks out of landfill sites. So it's not just the energy sector that has methane. And as I understand it too, when we do major hydroelectric projects and you have to flood out huge areas, that creates bogs that also cause methane emissions. And so I'm just sort of wondering if you can kind of map that out too. I mean, when we're meeting our methane reduction targets, it seems to me that like there's more than just the energy sector that we've got to be looking at. But tell us, since you're specific to the energy sector, why would there be methane leaks at oil and gas sites?
Well, there's two types. I mean, there's the ones that operational leaks, and from time to time there's going to be small releases just through active maintenance and different types of processes that, like I say, fall under the heading of operational. But in terms of methane leaking from facilities, from pipelines, or as you mentioned, garbage dumps, etc. I mean, the amount of methane that's out there is really quite staggering, and I suspect that if you go back and look, there was actually a paper done in Europe back in the late 70s, and they at that time were saying that 50 to 60% of all methane in the atmosphere was from just direct natural causes. So yeah, it's not just the industry that's creating energy that produces methane per se. So
Is that a little bit tricky though for you when you create your drone technology? I mean, can you differentiate between methane that is coming from natural sources versus methane that we ought to do something about because it's caused by human activity?
sure, I mean, basically we have a calibration so that we filter out the background. So I mean the type of background methane is basically calibrated out. So when we look at a pipeline or when we look at any type of a facility where there's a leak, you can actually see the plume coming out of it. And I'll just mention that in terms of if you look at resolution, the camera that we use, I can actually see a Bic lighter venting from 15 meters away.
Holy cow, it's very
So
sensitive. So let me tell
it's
people where they can go. It's perspectum.ca, perspectum.ca. And if you go into their little media tab, there's a video that you can watch. And Ty has shown me as well, some of the video as well. So actually quite remarkable that you can see the plumes. And as he said, very sensitive. So 15 meters away, you can see venting of a Bic lighter. Now the drone can't get that close, but you can detect, if I'm remembering our discussion, you can detect a methane leak that's on the ground from 150 meters away. Am I right on that?
Yeah, that's correct. And actually, it is further than that, Danielle. I'll just mention that we do all our testing, and it's turned out to be invaluable. Because we are operators, we have a sweet gas, oil and gas processing facility that we've actually adapted to be able to do controlled, measured releases. So we do all our own calibrating, all our own testing on our own site. So we're very fortunate in that we're able to go out, and that's why when we finally decided on this particular sensor, we had gone through, we disqualified a number of others for reasons, everything from not working in winter. There's a good one for you in Alberta. It doesn't work in winter.
But you still have
We
methane. You still have methane emissions in winter. I guess I don't know. I wondered if the frozen ground somehow would keep the emissions under control or reduce them. Is that not the case?
No, not at all. In fact, I mean, snow is as porous and permeable as you can find. So
Hmm.
basically, there's no difference in the plume that's coming out of a leaky pipe in the ground than what you would see coming out of covered with snow than what you'd see
Hmm.
coming with just regular ground cover. So yeah, those types of things are like I say, they're everywhere. When it comes down to being able to monitor garbage dumps or any of these other sites that are out there, certainly there's an application for that, and I want to make that very clear that obviously it's not just the oil and gas industry that's producing methane. And in fact, I would also say that from the work that we've done, I'm pretty proud to say that most of the facilities are very tight. There's actually even less than I would have expected. So we're
That's
not
the worry
finding
that I
that.
have, Ty, is that I wonder about the baseline that we have. That it's one thing when you set such an aggressive target of 75%, it doesn't really take into account your starting point. I mean, if we had a starting point where every pipe was leaking and every site was leaking and it was an absolute catastrophe, then sure, 75% might make sense. But if you, as you say, have a lot of tight facilities and we're already starting at a low level, a 75% reduction target is harder and harder to get those reductions, the smaller and smaller that they are. Is there some reason we should be concerned about that 75% target?
Well, I think the 75% target is aggressive to begin with, but certainly, as you mentioned, one of the biggest problems that we have is that there's in terms of actually quantifying and when they come up with these numbers as to what we're starting from, that baseline is rather fictional.
Hmm.
There's very little measurement that's been that you can actually put into that equation as far as where we're starting from, and that, quite frankly, is one of the reasons why what we're doing is we're trying to promote to the industry a starting point to create those baselines. One of the other things that I'll just mention is that with the current legislation, it only requires identification or detection of methane. And there's any number of companies and systems out there right now who can do that statically. Some also are airborne. But what we're doing, because we do have our own facility, is we're going into machine learning and AI training. And so we've hooked up with a company here in Calgary to do the software application for us. So we just supply them reams and reams of data, and we're hoping that by next spring we'll have a system whereby the plume identification, we move into plume measurement. So we'll be able to look at the plume and actually quantify it in a measurement. That will be the start of being able to create a real non-fictional baseline, and that's going to be big.
Okay, so I did talk to an energy company, and they say that they have to make a report every year about what their emissions are. And so there is some kind of reporting that's going on. I don't know how public the data is, but are you suggesting those are more notional reports as opposed to actual measurements?
There's far more. Yeah, the notional reports or the fictional reports are really in the absence of hard measured numbers, hard quantified numbers. The AER even provides that you can go in, and if you have a model A65 valve or various types of hardware, and if they're leaking, they give you some type of a guesstimation of what that would be leaking if it wasn't functioning properly. Those are where those numbers are coming from. So um, it's it's sketchy. It really
Hmm.
is.
All right. So we've got an aggressive target, don't have great baselines, but we have a solution. Now, tell us a little more about how this optical gas technology works. Because it sounds like you said you tried a number of different options. What is it how is it able to detect? How is it able to be so sensitive? What have you done that's a bit of a breakthrough?
Well, and this is not new technology. It's been around for a while. Originally, starting 3-4 years ago, a number of companies were looking at just a thermal camera, and
Yeah.
so looking at, and there are some good thermal cameras out there that are extremely sensitive. And so obviously it's just a change in temperature, change in ambient air temperature. If you have a leak coming out of a pipeline or a facility window, tank top, whatever, there's going to be at least a short-lived thermal anomaly. So what we do, the difference, and by the way, that's not accepted by the AER. The thermal side is
Mm.
not accepted. The accepted and best practice method right now with the AER is, and I'll share this with you because a lot of people don't realize this, but the accepted and tried and proven methods are sniffer detection. That's a whole other podcast because we've been doing that for 70 years. The accuracy, well, yeah, it needs some help.
When you say
So we can
sniffer
do that.
detection, is there equipment for that?
Yes, there is. Yes,
Okay.
and it's usually going on fixed wing or helicopter. It's obviously subject to an awful lot of environmental factors. It's just
Okay.
something that's been used a long time, and it needs to be improved upon. That's what we're doing. So just as a for instance, when you go into a shack, into a treater facility, or the standard way of confirming leakage is with a bottle of soap water, a spray bottle with soap water, spray it on, look for the bubbles. I'm not kidding.
That
And
seems a little low tech, Ty.
yeah, it's a little low tech, and but you know what? It works. It works. And then of course there's the good old audible. Listen for it. Oh yeah, I hear a leak. You know, this is the type of stuff that
Mhm.
we looked at this, and I know my sons, they just looked at it and said, "Are you kidding?" I mean, we have technology. We need to be better. We can be better. Back to the point on the OGI, then on the optical gas imaging. It's just basically the evolution then of the thermal camera. It looks at a specific wavelength, within the spectrum, and different gases have different response to on the wavelength type of on the wavelength side, on the infrared. So this particular technology is geared to kind of the midpoint of that spectrum. For instance, hydrogen, helium, various other gases could also be found with an optical gas imaging technique. Those cameras have not been developed yet. I suspect somewhere in the back rooms they're under development, but they're going to require a different bandwidth, a different spectral piece on that. We actually have we'll be starting next month a multi-year collaboration with SAIT, whereby we'll be looking at additional sensors, but also, as I mentioned, we need to upgrade on the drone platform side of it, and become much better at longer flights and heavier payloads. So that's kind of the evolution of where we're going with this.
Well, that even tells you, I mean, that's a 3-year collaboration and you're still in development. That's why I get a little bit nervous that we're sort of at the beginning stages of developing technology, and we've already set a pretty aggressive target of where we would need to be by 2030. So I'll keep on figuring out whether or not that's going to be reasonable. But let's talk about what happens when you identify the leak. What is then the next step for repairing it? I mean, can every leak be capped or plugged or in some way addressed? Or are there some leaks that we still don't have the technology to be able to do? Give us some idea of the process there.
So in terms of facilities where we're focused right now, it can be as simple as going out and just tightening up a fitting.
Hmm.
It can be that simple. The size of these leaks are quite small. It can be if there's a situation with a flare stack, if the flare stack is venting, if the storage tanks are venting, it may require, it's different from location to location, company to company. But when it comes right down to it, we're at the point now where if you're going to reduce methane emissions, you better have the solution for it. So, like I say, it can be as simple as tightening up a fitting, closing your tank hatches, watching your flare stack. Have you got gas coming out that's not being burnt? Is your pilot light out? Any number of things that way.
And if
One
somebody
thing,
was
Danielle,
Well, tell
that
me
I that
tell
I
me how somebody would use your technology. I guess I'm wondering who hires you? Is it an individual company for an individual site? Is it a pipeline company so that they can have you run your drone through the entire length of pipe? Is it the regulator who wants to address issues of compliance? Is it an environmental group who thinks that there might be a problem in an area? I've already talked to you about, I'm quite curious to know what the methane emissions are around the garbage dump that's near my house. How would somebody hire you to do this? Who are your customers?
they're industry partners at this point in time. We have spent most of our time over the last 2 years in that R&D phase. We have not aggressively been out marketing our services, and so we're now at the point where we will start marketing. Of course, we're coming up on winter now, which is going to be a little difficult to work in with the current drone technology that we have. But the season typically will run, from kind of early spring until the end of November, weather pending. But the calls can come from anybody. We haven't been contacted by any environmental groups.
Hmm.
It's typically operating companies who want to and realize that they need to be compliant. So they need to get a handle on what their emissions actually are, and those are, as far as pipelines go, Daniel. that's a little bit different. And when you were talking or when you were asking about how you remedy these situations, these leaks that we find around leases and around facilities are smaller leaks and are generally pretty easy to fix. So once you get into flow lines or larger capacity gas lines, if there's a leak, yeah, it's going to have to be typically dug up and repaired because particularly if it's sour. I mean, obviously you cannot have a sour leak. So there's the strategy for fixing these things. It's there. It's quite frankly, these things that are leaking shouldn't be leaking. I think that's a safe bet. And I think, industry wide, people would say that if there's a leak, it needs to be fixed, and quite likely it shouldn't be leaking. Plain and simple.
All right. So give me an idea of what it is we're expecting for, because I think there's, you mentioned a Directive 60 at the provincial level. We've got the federal government weighing in on these targets as well. So what are you anticipating for the urgency of companies being able to effectively identify these leaks? Is this coming up in the matter of weeks, months, years? What do you know about the regulatory environment?
Well, as it sits right now, the obligation, when, as I mentioned earlier, in 2020, when Directive 60 came out, the AER basically said, okay, this is an educational year. We're not, and of course, at that point in time, commodity prices, etc., were not that good, and as I said, an educational year. So it was a year where if people were compliant and were reporting, good on them. 2021, which we're now coming to a close on, they're going to be studying. I had conversation with them earlier this week. They're going to be studying the compliance and getting a feel for how many companies are reporting. It's not just a matter of reporting leaks, Danielle, but it's a matter of, and this I suspect is where the governments are hoping they're going to start developing a more quantified baseline for their calculations. Industry has to report, and this is something you have to do, whether there's leaks or not. You have to have a plan. You have to have a program where you go out and there's different pipelines operating depending on how old they are, depending on their operating pressures. Some of these lines, if they're carrying sour product, have to be surveyed every month. They have to be checked every month. If you look at the regulations on looking at your facilities, that's supposed to be done annually. So there's different criteria for different reporting, but it all is supposed to be reported now. And so my understanding is that, and I know that we did get a letter. Yeah, here we are. It's kind of like the doctor with the kid with the broken arm, but we have the capability as an operator. We just hadn't gotten around to it this year. It's an annual filing. So we went out and did ours, but we did get a letter in the mail stating, oh yeah, by the way, guys, you now have to report this. So I'm assuming that I've talked to a couple of other operators. I think everyone has gotten that. I have had some calls. In fact, I've had some calls from industry people who say, oh yeah, can you come out and now that the commodity price is up, we have budget this year for doing this. And of course, I find that interesting because it doesn't matter whether you had budget or not. This is a regulatory compliance situation.
Yeah, it sounds like the 2020 education year, 2021 reporting year, 2022 sounds like that is the enforcement year.
Right. And so one of the other things when I mentioned the AI and the quantification moving from detection to measurement, in conversations with the AER and also with the Department of Energy, we know that at the end of 2022, when they go back in and review Directive 60, there's no question that we're moving from, and the requirement is going to be measurement or detection to measurement.
All right.
That's one of the reasons we're getting on that.
So
I think that'll.
Yeah, it's going to make a huge difference. Is your technology able to be deployed now? If somebody's interested in trying to get a jump on this and want to work with your company, are you still in the development phase or are you in the deployment phase? Can anyone use your technology?
We're very much in the deployment phase right now. We had planned on, because the limiting factor is not the sensor itself, the optical gas imaging. I mean, I don't think I'd want to go out and try and run it at -40, but certainly we think that in terms of a temperature threshold, very comfortable, and the manufacturer is saying we could probably run it to -10, -15. The problem, Danielle, is the drone. It's a lithium battery powered. We get about a half an hour of flight time out of it. As the temperature drops, the battery efficiency is lost. So we probably are not going to be flying it much below -5. So in terms of being deployment, yes, we can answer that call if somebody calls and says we need something done, as long as it's not -5 or colder, we can meet that. Part of what we want to be doing with SATE, we think that there's going to be a point in time here when, or it could be, and I'm speculating on this, but I think it's logical to think that if there's been a large number of companies who have been non-compliant in their reporting, when the AER sees that non-compliance, I wouldn't be surprised if there's not an awful lot of notices go out. And so I'm thinking that as typical enforcement would go from the AER, they're going to give you a period of time to become compliant, whether that's 30 or 60 or 90 days. And so there may be an awful lot of companies looking to have work done starting in December, that type of thing. I don't know.
A good thing. I guess it's a good thing we have Chinooks, so you'll be able to keep some busyness over the winter. But it sounds like spring, summer, fall might be the optimal time. Ty, thank you so much for letting us know about your company. I'll just remind people it's a Perspectum Drone Inspection Services, PERSPECTUM.ca, and they're already operational, but also, of course, looking to expand. Any final words there, Ty?
No, I don't think so, Danielle. I think just one of the other things that kind of came to mind while we were talking, and this goes back to this baseline and what are we really where are we starting from, and I think there's going to be some additional thought put into this. When Directive 60 originally came out, I think that was I won't say a knee-jerk reaction because they did put quite a bit of time into it, but all things evolve, and I think what we're going to start seeing is one of my peeves right now is with the Orphan Well Fund, and everyone should understand that when they go to revise this Directive 60, there is a distinction between a well. It's either active or it's inactive. Oddly enough, if it's categorized as inactive and it's being operated by an oil and gas company, that company is exempt from having to do anything on that well. Being inactive, I guess the assumption being that it's not emitting, it's not leaking. So
wouldn't it be the opposite, Ty? Like, wouldn't it be more likely an old well that's inactive? Wouldn't it be more likely that it would have a methane leak?
Absolutely. And the second part of this that I think is going to be rectified is that when a well, even if it is active and it becomes an intake for the Orphan Well Association, as soon as that well goes into the Orphan Well Association, it automatically becomes categorized or classified as inactive, and they don't have to perform any due diligence on that well in terms of leaks. So I'm looking forward to seeing. I'm also a taxpayer of Alberta, obviously. So as a taxpayer, as a producer who's subjected to these rules and regulations and has to follow them, and as a service provider, there's a whole bunch of things that there's a bit of a disconnect, and I think those need to be changed.
I think you're right. You give me a couple of lobbying priorities. Thank you so much for raising those. Ty Pfieffer has been my guest. Once again, he's with Perspectum Drone Inspection Services. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Danielle.
We'll talk to you again. All right. We're going to stay on the topic of how we reduce methane emissions. Dave Yager is my next guest. We also have a huge number of topics to run by with him. He didn't hear my intro, but Obviously, a lot of concern in the energy sector about the climate emergency debate that is apparently going to happen at the city of Calgary. Calgary and Edmonton always act in tandem, so I would fully expect to see a similar debate in Edmonton, although someone told me they've already declared a climate emergency. Maybe they will just reaffirm it. I'm not quite sure, and I'm not sure what it means. In other jurisdictions, let's be clear what it means. In other jurisdictions, there have been municipal councils that have made the decision not to allow any new natural gas hookups for new construction. So it's not irrelevant when municipalities make this kind of decision, but we need to know what kind of policies are attached to it. Of course, Francois Legault in the Quebec National Assembly, Quebec announcing that it was going to ban all exploration of oil and gas within Quebec borders. They've expropriated the leases. Presumably, they will compensate for that. Of course, we're on the cusp of the Glasgow COP26 event, which is where all of the big minds get together to talk about new climate policy. Our own Environment Minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, has said that the energy sector is going to have to reduce methane emissions by 75% by 2030, with the general reduction being 30% by 2030. So we needed Dave Yager to weigh in on all this because it's a lot of political stuff. But he also happens to run a company that reduces methane emissions and plugs up leaks. And I want to start there, and then we'll talk about some of the other issues. Dave, thanks so much for being with me again today. I always introduce you as an energy policy analyst, author of From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, a Carbon Story. But you are also the principal operator of a company called Winterhawk. So
Winterhawk, Winterhawk.
Tell us what you do there.
Winterhawk Well Abandonment Limited, or casing expansion services, and it is a new method of shutting off methane leaks from old wells. I caught the tail end of your piece with Ty, and there are officially 10,000 leakers in Alberta. What you have to do is actually part of an annual test for the regulator. The RCB has been for years. Is you have to do a routine test of do you have a vent flow? Is there an external leak on a well? Normally, it's done with a bucket of water, a pail of water, and a hose, and you simply go back: is it leaking or not leaking? And then if it is leaking, there's various categories. But yeah, it's a big problem. It's the current methods of fixing it. There's two categories of leaks. The drone can deal. There's cheap leaks, surface leaks, and then there's expensive, complicated leaks. And I got the little AER chart, which has been updated, but I've got the spread of where does our methane leaks come from? This is the segue into you must reduce emissions by 70%. Well, where are they coming from? Well, first of all, they're not coming from flaring. I think it's really important that we say that if you go around the world, there's these outfits called Carbon Tracker, and they have the countries in the world that are flaring natural gas. They're not producing it. They're just simply either venting it into the atmosphere or burning it because there's no market for it. And so although Canada is the 5th largest oil and gas producer in the world on a barrel of oil equivalent basis, we're number 22 in terms of methane emissions from flaring. And that is because we have a market for methane, and it's illegal to flare. I mean, it's been illegal for some time. You just can't do that. But the bad guys, the king of the hill, is microscopic type. Number 1 is Russia, couldn't care less. Number 2 is Iraq, who cares? And Iran. The United States was really bad for a while in the Permian. They were flaring a billion cubic feet a day until they got pipeline access. And you go down the list, you get number 22 of the top 30 flaring by country. The 2 countries that produce oil that flare the least methane per barrel are Canada and Saudi Arabia, just for the record. So we're, as many things that happen in the world, if you're in the oil business, you're just by nature, by DNA bad. And how awful are you? It's not a question of you doing good. I think that we're the idea that the Canadian oil and gas industry is a horrible source of methane emissions is wrong.
You know what? That's an important distinction to make, because that has always bothered me about our negotiation strategy when we go into these climate meetings, is that there's no recognition of our starting point. And I saw that particularly on electricity. We are one of the cleanest grids in the world.
Yeah, because
all the
hydro,
all the nuclear. Yeah. And yet we set more aggressive targets than other countries that didn't have the same profile. And it seems like we're doing the same thing. We're not even really acknowledging where we're at relative to other countries. We're just saying that now we've got to get to 75% less.
Well, the point is we're already 100. We're already hugely less than other countries, but of course, these people don't run for public office in other countries. This is the point. The point is that when politicians get a hold of energy policy, we can talk, this is a separate subject. We can go right back to the National Energy Program, the New Royalty Framework. When politics and energy end up in the same room, invariably the policy is not that great. So we tend to write policy, particularly climate policy, in a vacuum. But anyway, to get into all the stuff you want to do here. So that's first of all, let's set the stage that we're really way much better than this, than anyone thinks. But you'd have to care, and then you'd have to ask questions of the oil industry and have to trust them with the answer. This is an independent body. This is from the World Health Organization and Carbon Tracker. Make
sure that you send that to me, because I'll post a link on my social media for it. So
I'll send you the report. It's pretty interesting. Now that is flared gas. What we're talking about, what your last guest talked about, and what we're going after was what's called fugitive emissions. And that is accidental methane emissions. Now, this is the latest bugbear of the anti-natural gas movement. They tried hard for years to ban fracking, but then when the United States had the largest single reduction in carbon emissions in world history by replacing coal with natural gas, that one's not going pretty good. What else is wrong with natural gas? Fugitive emissions. So here's how this breaks down. Is the largest source of fugitive emission is pneumatic devices, and this is the problem. Methane's a gas, so there's valves and there's pumps and there's compressors. There's hardware, right? When I was in the health and safety business, we used to go around with the same technology. I think Ty's using an infrared camera, and we used to go around and look for fugitive emissions and methane leaks. And so he's absolutely on the right track. The first thing you do is monitor where's it coming from, and that's a great place to start. The next thing you do is measure. And then the third thing you do is mitigate. And so I think what we're going to see, and I really enjoyed his presentation, and we're actually in the mitigate department, moving into the measurement department. But if I was on a board of directors and I had Directive 60, or if I was running a company and management said to me, we're going to tackle emissions, I would want to know where my emissions are coming from. And I would want, would like a cost benefit analysis on what we're going to shut off first. And so many of the emissions will go away when the asset is decommissioned. For example, if you're producing oil into a tank that's got a vent in the top, well, just quit producing the oil, it's gone. If it's a gas compressor that's got leaky seals, and I can imagine there's huge amounts of gas compression to move natural gas from, northern Alberta to Toronto. There's seals and assemblies every step of the way. So you just put, basically either tighten up the fittings or shut it off. So there's a whole bunch of methane emissions that are going to disappear when assets are decommissioned. We have to be working on subsurface leak sources. And so in some ways, it's the well, it's the gift that keeps on giving, the well shut in and suspended. And I know you've done some work on this file. We've talked about this before. It leaks anyway. So these are certainly the more complex. In my discussions with Department of Parks and Environment, the industry is going to go after the low-hanging fruit first, and so the idea that, like I said, drones are a great advancement, compared to airplanes, but it was the same thing. Fly over it. Where's it coming from? This will be find it, and then you go measure it, and then you go mitigate it. So it's a great technological opportunity. And we got some money for finally, the industry has some cash, but I have appeared on panels with IT guys and, software guys, and they're talking about the technology to put this data. Once you collect this data, all this is done digitally. So there's a great period of time here to go in and transform the measurement, monitor and measurement business, get all the data, be able to fill those reports out. And then say, okay, where is the cheapest methane, or where the methane is causing me the problems? The specific area we work on, which is leaking wellbores, have of course multiple problems. The Department of Energy owns the hole, the wellbore, and then environment owns the air, and then the farmer owns the surface lease, and the county wants the property taxes. So I was actually just talking to some people with the Alberta government. And I think we've talked about this, how this is really a multi-departmental challenge, this particular source of methane emissions, because it has multiple stakeholders, not just environment, not just energy.
The sense I'm getting from you, aside from that complexity, and we'll talk about that as well, but the sense I'm getting from you is we've got a pretty good handle on who's flaring and how much, but I don't get the sense that we know where we compare with this fugitive emissions problem relative to other jurisdictions. Is there any way you can quantify that for us?
Fugitive emissions are well known. I would say we're ahead. It was very important when gas was worth more, because it's costing you money. Like if you've got a gas gathering and processing facility and it's leaking into the atmosphere, well, at some price, so what? It costs more to fix than it does to sell it. But luckily, with the way gas prices are going, it's actually commercially advantageous to find the source of those fugitive emissions. The great thing about Alberta with our mature base, and that's what's interesting, is the two countries with the lowest emissions of flaring, is we have a natural gas market and we have a natural gas infrastructure. And a lot of the oil has associated gas with the oil that comes out of the ground. So the ability to actually capture it and tie it in, there's other things you can do with it. Some of the people are taking these fugitive emissions, generating electricity, and mining Bitcoin. Other gas leaks are, there is a commercial opportunity.
I have heard of that.
Absolutely.
I talked to another guy in Red Deer who's capturing the emissions and turning it into a protein that I think can then be used for animal feed. Who knew that you could do that?
It's really quite again, as heat becomes worth something again. And when our mutual friend Howard Sorensen from back in the day, his company owns gas wells, and they put them right beside greenhouses. So they generate the heat for the greenhouse. They pump the CO2 in, the waste gas in there, so things grow like a weed. They head to heck with Bill McKibben. They head for 1,200 parts per million as quick as they can. And they also generate electricity for the lights. And so there's great opportunity. There's lots of things to do with gas, and there's lots of applications. So we're really good at this. In Western Canada, we're ingenious. We care. We got smart people. We have markets for gas, and so we have cash to work with. And so the point is as I finish my book, and what we're doing here is, as we in Alberta, we as an industry, both producers and service providers, get better at this. We have products to export to the rest of the world if the rest of the world decides to care as much as we do. So there's no problem if that's what the.
Well, I love the way you put it. I don't want to be a negative Nancy, but what the heck? I may as well be the negative Nancy, because here's the thing I always worry about. I worry about the massive disconnect between politicians and their understanding of where the industry is at relative to the rest of the world, the progress we're making on the environmental front, the economic aspects you just discussed. Why would you want to flare or vent this stuff when it's becoming increasingly valuable? We have an incentive to do it, and yet we still seem to have our own, I want to use the Dave Yager phrase, we don't measure ourselves against the best practices of others. We measure ourselves against utopia. And utopia is zero emissions anywhere at any time. And when you're trying to create a target like that, you're creating a target that may be achievable one day, but is it achievable in 8 years? That's what I'm worried about. Are these targets too aggressive, or have we got this? What's your sense?
All politics is local. And so so when you say we're doing better than Nigeria, that's not going to get you any votes in downtown Toronto. So the reality is that this is a local issue. It's a political hot button, and so the United States is another one. I think they were the leader on the methane side under Obama, and then they could have kicked the can down the road and came back. And I guess to ask the people to do it that can do it, it's not unreasonable. It's unfair, but it's not unreasonable. So yeah, the politics are the politics are abhorrent. I mean, we're gonna get into that with all the things you said we'd be talking about.
Completely.
And,
Hey, but before we do, just give me one more, just sort of the short version of what it is, how you address this problem. Tell us just a little bit more about your company, about if we're
Winterhawk?
going to start serious, yeah, with Winterhawk, if we're going to get serious about addressing and on the mitigation part of this in the next coming years, what is it that you do that would be able to help?
We have a different method of going down into a well and resealing the cement from the inside. Like what happens over time is most wells, when they're drilled, they line them with steel casing and cement them up the outside. And over time, the cement deteriorates or corrodes or crumbles really. And over time, it starts to leak. Or else another area, it's very difficult to get a good cement job across a porous zone full of gas. I mean, there's just granite. Great, you get a great cement seal on granite. You don't get such a good one on sand. So the problem is the nature of the changing rocks in the wellbore means the quality of your cement varies depending on where you are. So the current method is called a cement squeeze, where you try to re-cement the outside of the well from the inside. You actually blow holes in the steel and pump more cement in from surface, and try to find these cracks and seal them with more cement. And the trouble with the cement squeeze is that it's got a 30 to 50% success rate. It's really, it's not that effective. As a matter of fact, Natural Resources Canada, in their analysis of this subject, said that cement squeezes are so expensive and unsuccessful, they recommended simply taxing that methane and then using it to shut it off somewhere else, which is fine, unless you want to abandon the well or you've got a landowner issue. So, I mean, there's an economist in full flight, right? It is inexpensive. So what we've come up with is a method of expanding the steel from the inside with this very, very clever, powerful tool. And then we squeeze the crack shut from the inside. So we reseal the cement without putting any holes in the casing or impairing its wellbore integrity. Very clever, actually. My brother-in-law invented this. He's one of those mechanical geniuses. So we've done some wells. We had our first cut and cap was a well we did late last year. We shut the gas off completely, not a bubble. Alberta Energy Regulator gave us a big gold star. We cut and cap that baby, and they're doing the surface location. We've got some more work coming up. It's been a difficult market to introduce new ideas for many, for many reasons. And I sort of got involved with the company 2 years ago. I sort of got it all figured out, helping out my brother-in-law, and I got it refinanced. And then along came COVID, and I just had to laugh out loud. Oh, come on.
Bad timing.
Yeah, well, whatever. I'm not. This didn't. A lot of people had their lives disrupted by COVID. I'm not the Lone Ranger, but the idea. So it had a huge setback, but. The winds are blowing our way. We've had some technical success. We have some work coming up, and I'm hoping that this will be the objective is for this to be another made in Alberta global solution.
I love it.
Well,
okay, now
yeah.
let's sort of navigate our way east and talk about Quebec, because you're right that in downtown Toronto they may not care what our record is relative to Nigeria, but the place where it's immediately relevant is where else are they getting their product from. So our record compared to America should matter. I think in Quebec they're still getting it from places like either Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan. I think they stopped bringing it in from Saudi Arabia in St. John. You'll have to tell me if I'm accurate on that. I know everybody still thinks that Quebec is taking in a lot of Saudi Arabian oil, but that is not the case.
No.
But then there's also the question of, when you're looking at our friends in Europe being able to develop natural gas resources here, ship them off the port of Saguenay with LNG, or even Quebec developing its own natural gas resources to be able to help out our friends in Europe so they don't have to rely on Russia, which I made note of is the worst when it comes to flaring. These things should matter. It should matter if you're going to be concerned about where you're sourcing your product. You should be looking at at who your customers or who your providers are, and then developing reasonable policy around it. So I'm just going to sort of get off my soapbox and get your thoughts on what Francois Legault has just done, because I'm shaking my head.
It is impossible for me to say anything nice about Quebec on the energy file. It is the Canadian capital of irrational virtue signaling. They have been blocking pipelines, dispensing advice. Natural Resources Canada did an interesting study on primary energy by province. And the number one in all forms, and this is oil, gas, coal, nuclear, renewables, hydro. And what's interesting is the number one producer of primary energy province is Alberta by a long shot. Number two is Saskatchewan because of uranium. They don't have a nuclear reactor in sight, but number three is British Columbia, and well behind is Mr. Green, Quebec, with electricity, with hydro. So then you go back and you look at the chart again. So you take the nuclear out of Saskatchewan, and they still produce more primary energy than Quebec. And so there's, first of all, they're just yes, we have hydro, and oh God, isn't it glorious? But the idea that the rest of the country could or should or even can follow the Quebec example because of geography. We just don't happen to have the rivers and the structure to do it. And I just don't think you can get a permit to flood an area the same size of however big they flooded in the early 70s. You couldn't even do that anymore.
No way.
So
not only because of the environmental reasons, but because of First Nations issues as well.
So there's item one is that you walk around like you've invented energy, and there's the data. It's just not true. And then there's the gas, the natural gas. So when I tried to go to Carleton University in the 70s, they called me a blue-eyed Arab from the colonies, and I told them what I suggested they do with Carleton University was anatomically impossible. I think it's about as nice as I can say it. But there was an oil rig drilling just outside of Quebec City, so I went to work for SOQUIP, the drilling for natural gas in the northern extension of the Utica Shale. And they were so worried about gas in the 70s, they actually had a provincial state oil company called SOQUIP that was trying to make sure that glorious Quebec didn't have to produce its own glorious hydrocarbons. There's been drilling on Anacostia Island. There's been drilling on the Gaspé Peninsula. And there's legacy leases and assets and wells in the eastern townships of Quebec, between Quebec City and Montreal, the northern extension of the Utica Basin. And so when Quebec says we're not going to, and then Anacostia Island, there was a lawsuit over some very promising geology in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And so when Quebec decides that we're not going to permit any production, obviously they are really, well, they're nullifying leases, they're commercial leases. And I trust compensation. I assume that they may or may not pay compensation. You may have to sue for it, but certainly every time that a lease has been extinguished in Alberta, as has been the case from time to time, the Crown has ponied up. There's been a dispute about how much, but they have done that. And then, of course, there's the imports. I mean, they do, you're very good qualification on that. They do bring a lot of, they did reverse Line 9 finally after great protest. This was a pipeline. This was the great pipeline blockage that everyone forgets about when they tried. Line 9 was built by Trudeau from Sarnia to Montreal to put Montreal on Western crude. When the offshore crude became cheaper, they actually imported it. And when Suncor said, I'd like to reverse it again, there was a great hue and cry. And if you recall, there was protests and sabotage and everything. And we're all going to die if we repurpose this pipeline to its own. But miraculously, the industry outlasted the protesters, and we got Montreal back on Canadian crude. So they're absolutely right. They do get most of their crude. A lot of crude comes from Western Canada now, a lot comes to the States. But they still do import crude from offshore. It doesn't seem to bother them. They have obviously said you cannot pass that filthy, dirty Western oil through our pristine province to get it to New Brunswick. We know that story. Energy East and New Brunswick has been trying to get off imported crude, get on Alberta crude forever. And, now, no social acceptability, and no one even dares even bring it up. And the last one was Saguenay, Energy Saguenay, where a group of developers, because we have gas pipeline all the way to Montreal, they had to build a short connector to Saguenay. And the idea was we would build an LNG liquefaction facility and run it off of Quebec Hydro and sell the greenest LNG available to Europe. And that was the last thing. And Legault was on the record as he blocked the oil pipelines a few years ago of saying we support this pipeline. this project. And then just the other day, they said the best thing we can do for the planet as it goes back to burning coal because of shortages of natural gas is to block that pipeline.
You know, and I think we need to connect this to our earlier discussion, because now there's this mythology that is being created that natural gas-fired electricity is worse than coal-fired electricity, because this
Well,
has always been our argument, right?
that is the methane leakage. That's the only way they can do it, is they have to claim that there's so much methane leaking out associated with natural gas production that we can't afford to burn it. And this is why I said earlier they originally opposed hydraulic fracturing until the case became so obvious in the States that dog wouldn't hunt anymore. So the next place is the methane emission leakage. And it's like many of these things. Okay, so we'll have to do what we have to do. We'll have to demonstrate that, in fact, it's not as bad as it sounds. And again, this is only here. They don't say, well, you're way better at this than the places that are supplying the rest of the world oil. It doesn't seem to matter. It has to be local. But yeah, there is an assault on natural gas that it is no better than coal. But it's only because of the very subject we're talking about here today, is the methane emissions. And that is, like many of the things that, with the thing with the opponents of fossil fuels, is they find something to tie on to. And when that doesn't work, they just move on. So they went after the oil sands for the longest time. And then the oil sands started cleaning up and they blocked a couple of pipelines. And then they moved to fracturing. I mean, as the gas to replace the coal in the United States was being developed, that resulted in the greatest reduction in emissions in world history, they fought fracking every step of the way. And then you remember Gasland, the movie, and
Yep.
The upstate New York, they banned a gas pipeline going from the Pennsylvania into New York or upstate New York, and on it goes. And then part of your introduction. Then San Francisco says, well, you can't charge fake on gas anymore. It is gratuitous virtual signaling at every level, without a nano shred of science behind it.
Well, and this is the concern that I have is, first of all, let's talk about the science. I know you're not a scientist because you wrote a book on this and you seem to know quite a bit about chemistry. I had someone ask me the question, why is methane, which is chemically CH4, so much worse than CO2, which is chemically C and then 2 molecules of oxygen? They both contain 1 C. So what is it that has everybody saying it? Because I think the common line is that methane emissions are 10 times worse or 10 times worse.
There is no natural withdrawal of methane from the atmosphere. I mean, the carbon dioxide is absorbed by plants. I think it's one of the problems. Yeah, it's
not circular. So once
there's
it's
a cycle with CO2. Yeah, so it's the amount of time it stays in the atmosphere. If you're to trace one molecule, how long does it hang around? Because it's a big cycle that's absorbed by the oceans. The other thing is, again, not a scientist, but it's the ability of a molecule to trap moisture in the atmosphere. That's another factor. It's not actually the CO2 that traps heat. It's the ability to hold more moisture in the atmosphere that traps heat. But the fact is methane sort of has to disappear on its own, whereas CO2 gets consumed.
That's helpful. Okay, here's what I don't understand is we knew that natural gas was going to be the next target. It was very obvious. You and I have been talking for literally years, and we've been watching this debate as it goes. Why does the industry keep getting outmaneuvered on this? This is what I don't get, because I thought our premier, Jason Kenney, he'd gone on, this was pre-COVID, he and Francois Legault had a great discussion en français. Francois Legault said, I'm not going to block your LNG. And then kaboom, not only did he block the LNG project you just discussed at Port Saguenay, but now to announce that there's going to be no oil and gas development within future oil and gas development. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if they'll shut down the existing producing properties that you mentioned.
Well, I don't think any of them are. I don't believe there's
none of them are producing anymore.
I don't believe there's much production on stream.
It's gone. But how did we lose this discussion? Is it that we didn't think it would move this quickly? We didn't think it would happen at all. We thought, oh, gee, they must be looking what's happened with the Texas power grid. Surely they wouldn't think that you could just turn off natural gas, being that it caused so much disruption. I guess I sort of figure that at some point sanity is going to set in, and yet our industry just keeps getting outmaneuvered on the politics of this.
I believe there's an election coming
In Quebec.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not the best reason to shut down on essential fuel, is it?
It'll do. I mean, you and I both spent some time in politics. What reason do you need? I mean, the number one job is to get your job. Number one, job is to do your job. And so I was very surprised when Quebec ruled that for the good of the global environment, we were not going to permit an LNG plant to be built. They had to lay I think it was 370 kilometers of pipe through, the map could be key ridings. I mean, it was just it's just so much. It's been a proven vote getter for a long time. The problems that the rest of the world is having with energy security and natural gas, people don't really pay attention to that till it nails them. I mean, we pay attention to that because we're in the business here in Alberta. You and I pay attention to that because we like to read things. We're policy wonks. But the average person in Quebec, if there's it's been quite a while since they split the sheets with France. If there's, I don't know that the problems that people are having elsewhere in the world has the impact, with the way modern media works and so on. So, but no, I think that is that decision at that time when Europe was going into a natural gas shortage and being in a position where the price of LNG was going to explode. Developing gas was looking extremely profitable for the first time in years, and preventing Europe from becoming hostage to Russia as its primary supplier of natural gas. If you had any sort of beyond your border sense of public policy, that'd be the right thing to do. But the only conclusion I can come to is that just don't much care what's going on in the rest of the world and the rest of Canada. And I would say history's proven that to be the truth.
Okay, I'm just going to make you a big screen for a minute while I'm going to go the other way. While I go and find the a video that the mayor-elect of Calgary, Jody Condick, did a couple of years ago in support of the energy sector. Now, I want to be fair in trying to portray her comments, but you've probably heard, along with me, the kind of freak out that some members of the energy sector are having in Calgary over this climate emergency debate or declaration she's going to have. Before as I'm digging around looking for that, I just want you to know what's coming. Just further piece together what's happening in Europe, because you've painted a pretty bleak picture. And I've talked to a number of others who say Europe's in real trouble this winter season. So tell me a little bit more, just so we can fill in the blanks. What's happening in Europe? Why are they having such an energy crisis? Why is that emerging?
Well, Europe has been. I just finished a column that should be out tomorrow on Europe has been leading the charge on renewables because it's been politically attractive, and so it's been a badge of honor as most of the European countries have embraced wind and solar. And they have done it at the expense of natural gas. The United Kingdom had a great potential for shale gas. They banned fracking. France has the same issue. And so they were offered gas from Israel, didn't like that. They were offered gas coming through Turkey, didn't like that. And so finally they got a perfect storm, or perfect eclipse of bad news. Is the wind quit blowing at the same time gas storage was low, and all of a sudden the economy picked up post-COVID, and they're out of energy. It seems it was incredible in a way that there would be an energy shortage in some of the wealthiest countries in the world, but energy poverty has struck Europe in a big way. And it is, and people say, well, it wasn't the fault of renewables. Well, no, you're right. It was the fault of the wind. It wasn't the fault of the turbines. It was the fault of the wind. And the same thing at night. It's not the fault of the solar panels. The sun goes down. And so they have left themselves extremely vulnerable. And the people that said that we must go to renewables, and the determination to replace fossil fuels got ahead of the ability of the substitute fuels to do what fossil fuel does, and that is to be cheap, dependable, reliable, and they're just not there. And so the world got ahead of itself, And the pandemic had partially to do with this, but it was a series of policy decisions made over the last few years. Anyway, there's our mayor there.
Yeah, I want to play that. But one more thing I want to ask you, because someone
Yes.
pointed out to me recently that the International Energy Agency, which is supposed to be the agency, I don't know, that was, I thought it was created in the 70s to make sure that we had energy security, has declared that we're going to get to 75% of our power grid being fueled off of wind and solar. And it just seems to me, haven't we won this debate? Isn't it now obvious that wind and solar cannot exist without natural gas as a backup? Isn't it obvious that intermittent power creates reliability problems? How is it that this is august and esteemed institute that is supposed to be guiding and helping to lead our energy thinking, our policy, and our investment decisions? How is it that they're still stuck on that?
That is the policy of the people that signs their checks, in my view. The International Energy Agency was built by the Western countries it was founded in the 70s during the OPEC crisis. To help the importing oil consuming or energy consuming countries deal with the shortage of energy. And so its primary function has been that. What's happened is the governments of the countries that fund the IEA have changed their mandates or changed their focus. They're based in Paris, and you know what they've done in Europe. I mean, the United States has elected Biden. In Canada, we've elected Trudeau. So they that's how they get their funding. And so they go to Paris when the countries that support them say we were endorsing net zero by 2050, then they have an obligation. It's expected that they will explain how it's done. The interesting thing about the IEA is if you read what they read carefully, they say that if you want to achieve net zero by 2050, if you want to turn that aspirational campaign promise into reality, then you must do this. Because on the days when they're not saying we have to go to 75% renewables by whenever, they've also been reporting, doing their old job, which is that investment in new supplies of oil and gas have been dangerously low for the last 5 years. They've also said that as well. It's just that is another report. So if you read everything coming out of the IEA, they are still doing their old job. But unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, they're also doing their new job. And that is answering the question of what the world has to look like to get to net zero by 2050, which is 100% aspirational.
All right. Let me tell you what. So this is the headline in the National Post. Canada, it says Calgary's new mayor says the city needs to move past oil and gas. Now, I want to read her quote directly, and then I want to play what she said back in 2018 when Cody Battersell from Canada Action asked her to make a statement in defense of Alberta's energy sector. So it says, new mayor-elect Jyoti Gondek is making waves for not for the fact that she's the first woman to serve as the city's mayor. In an interview with Real Talk host Ryan Jesperson from Edmonton on Tuesday, a day after her election, Gondek said her first order of business is to declare a climate emergency. Now, here's what she said. Quote, let's put ourselves on the map as a city that is the absolute leader in a transitioning economy. And let's show the world that by using innovation and technology, we can come up with greener, cleaner, sustainable solutions across all our industry sectors. So Gondek said in the interview that Calgary must, quote, move past the belief that the end product of energy production must be oil and gas. That's how it was depicted. Now, I just want to play for you what she said a year and a half ago, because this also started making the rounds. And then I want you to see if you can square the circle on this one. So we tested this earlier. We're going to play this and see if it works. It's a minute 16. Here we go.
Because I'm a Canadian and a public servant at the City of Calgary, I support Canada's oil and gas sector. Why? Because Canada's oil and gas firms have repeatedly demonstrated leadership on a global stage, whether through innovations in technology that minimize impact to the environment or unmatched standards in health and safety practices. That's not empty rhetoric. It's rooted in research and review. Rankings by Transparency International and the Jansi Social Index review global corporations for their triple bottom line performance. And Canadian energy producers continue to outperform other nations for one simple reason. Our companies are valued because they lead with their values. My name is Jyoti Gondek, City Councillor for Ward 3. I'm taking action for Canada's future because our national economy depends on Canadians advocating for our leadership in energy-based corporate social responsibility. Please join the movement and spread the word. Share this video and let your friends know that the City of Calgary is unified in supporting our energy sector. We are YYC proud.
All right. You know what? I don't think that's such a bad message. And so here's what I'm trying to know. Is there some way to square this circle? Has the mayor-elect changed, or are we misinterpreting what she said? Because let me just put it again in further context. I have had people who have sent me emails, people who have called me. Brad Wallace tweeted. Maybe energy companies should give Calgary a bypass when it comes to looking at headquarters. Maybe I've got people saying that there's 2 energy companies now actively considering moving out of Calgary. So this has serious ramifications for Calgary's tax base if it's misunderstood. So I don't want her to be misunderstood. What's your interpretation?
I mean, from where I said, that's really regrettable. If I look at what Calgary's been through, whether it's voluntary or not, we've had the heck kicked out of us in the past 7 years. You know, if you look at the downtown, if you look at the individuals, the people, they lost wealth, you know, the forced reality check. And it's been really, really a tough go. And I would say that pretty well, I think everyone in the oil and gas industry has understood that we'll never be where we were. We'll never be the same again. I think that's a matter of fact. People get the ESG investing. They get the climate change issues. And so I remember, and you did this more than I did, but I remember the night that I ran for public office in 2012. And it's a high energy thing. And we had a meeting the next morning, you may recall, and you were not the premier. Too bad. And I was not an MLA, or I shot at the energy minister, which is really bad. But I didn't sleep a wink that night. And that's what it's like. You know, I'm just trying to cut the new mayor as much slack as I possibly can. And so that was the first interview she did. She hadn't even been mayor for 24 hours. And the most generous thing I can say is I'm going to assume that if she could live that 30 seconds over, she would go back to what she recorded before, which is the same thing, and just not put a hot poker in the eye of all the people that didn't vote for her. And that is, as an oil guy, I mean, I couldn't believe it, you know, and there was all the stuff on social media, and I'm you know, there's very few advantages of being old, but one of them is, you know, you take a deep breath and try to personalize it. So I'm going to see if that motion, I believe that has to go. I'm not an expert on municipal politics because they can't wreck my life with pipeline approvals and royalty changes and taxation and depletion allowances. But I'm going to assume that to do what she said has to go through council. And I think one of the best stuff that's come out of this is the five main issues facing Calgary today. And this would be number 420. I mean, you know, so that's horrible. And I would hope that we didn't, you know, I think Rachel Notley had some weak moments shortly after she became premier, where somewhere along the way, only a month or two on our way to on the Paris Climate Convention, called Albertans the embarrassing cousin of Confederation. I was alone. I mean, she, you know, I bet that wasn't her finest hour, and that clip still exists. So we'll see. Calgary is one of the oil capital of Canada, whether we should be or not. We are. We're one of the leading oil centers in the world, and all of downtown was built by oil and gas. And you're the new mayor, and if you believe that, shame on you. And if you're going to if that's going to be the first thing you're going to try to do as mayor, shame on you. But I'm just looking at the having run for office. If you haven't done that, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't been through the campaign and the energy and the tension and the fatigue and everything that goes with it, I wouldn't say what I said. But having done that, I'm going to throw her a bone.
All right, we'll watch them because, as we know, Glasgow is going to really get underway in earnest on October 31st. I think there's behind the scenes, there's pre-meetings, and then there's meetings before the meetings, and there's the actual meetings, which I think happen somewhere in the mid-month of November. And so I guess what I'm concerned about is seeing the big cities in tandem passing climate emergency at the same time as we've got Francois Legault there talking about ending oil and gas. Exploration and development. I'm just worried that this becomes the international narrative in a month's time. And I just want your thoughts on what, if anything, we can do about it. I think we've got a great ESG story to tell for some of the reasons.
We do. No, it's outstanding. It is just like we talked about earlier in the interview about methane. Yep. We're really good at this. I mean, it's like that old James Bond song, nobody does it better. I mean, we really are world-class world leaders. If we only had a federal government that wasn't embarrassed, we'd be so further ahead and so many other people that weren't campaigning against us. When I look at Glasgow, this is the first modern climate climate conference in modern times that has been held in a period of energy shortages. If you go back to when this all started back in Rio and so on, there was a bit of a bump. I mean, nothing like the 70s. There was a bit of a bump in 08, 09 with the world financial crisis. But there has never been, particularly in the Western world, there has never been energy poverty. And so the backdrop of COP26 is one where the host country is rationing power. Incredible. It's shutting down industries. And what I've been following is there's something called the African Energy Council and African Energy Chamber. And their African Energy Chamber is going there. In 2015 in Paris, they promised the developing world $100 billion a year by 2020. They never made it. They're now going to ask for $1.3 trillion a year by 2030. And so what I'm seeing is the developing world. There's a great graphic. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a picture of all the top gas consumers per capita, and it's a graphic. I wish I had it in front of me.
Send that to me too when you find it. But
yeah, I will.
It anyway.
But I've got it on my machine. But it's great. It's these countries, which is gas consumption or natural gas per gigajoule, and they're all the OEC members. These countries are telling these countries they can't have gas. And it's all of Africa. It's the poorest countries in the world. And
you know what? There's a solution here, isn't there? Like if we use that green energy transfer mechanism or green credit transfer, whatever it's called, we could help to bring natural gas to Africa and get share credit back here for reducing greenhouse gas emissions if they're using, I don't know, wood and dung, and in some cases coal. Like there is a way to be able to bring this cleaner energy, reduce emissions, and also bring wealth and alleviate poverty. There should be a win here for everybody instead of taking a what is the defeat from the jaws of victory phrase? That's
the reason I want to talk. I want to talk about the macroeconomic environment under which this conference is being held. The politicians say you can't travel, so 30,000 people are going to fly there. They got some special hall pass on COVID tests. I mean, it's like the World Economic Forum, which is one of your pet peeves when the uber wealthy get together in Davos. You haven't got a private jet? Well, you never should have one either. And so it is. I'm really, really interested to see if the world media is going to do what they've done in the past, is dutifully report whatever the utterances may be on what the world ought to do in light of what's going on in their grocery cart and their power bill. This is what I meant, is that the whole energy transition was, as long as nobody had to pay for it, it was a great idea. First of all, the idea was we'll tax the heck out of oil companies and you won't have to pay, or else renewables were buried in the cost of renewables was buried in your power bills. The preferential purpose contracts or power purchase agreements were buried. The line charges were buried. I mean, all of this stuff. Now people have to pay. And so I'm hoping that we'll see. I'm looking forward to this because I don't think that this is going. I think none of them have been successful If you go back to Rio, the Earth Summit in 1992, Kyoto 1997, remember we were all supposed to have a world carbon credit trading program. That was 24 or 34 years, 24 years ago, and on and on and on. And then Paris, nobody's even close, right, on meeting their Paris commitments. And this was the one because Obama showed up, And then we've got China refusing to come. I think I saw a snippet that Putin's not going to grace them with their presence either. Hopefully, he's got a welding cap on finishing Nord Stream 2 so that Europe doesn't freeze this winter. And so I think this is I think we should watch this. Mm-hmm. And I think the media better than I do. They'll turn on you. They'll support something if they think that's what the way the world's going. And they do this with politicians. But the day that the flaws are apparent, they'll also well, wait a second, you said this. There was a little snippet on Twitter this morning. The first time they predicted the imminent end of the Australian Great Barrier Reef was 50 years ago, 50th anniversary of the end of the Great. It's still there.
And the Maldives as well. I think they were supposed to be underwater by the
And there's still snow on Kilimanjaro, tell Al Gore, and on and on and on. So all
of which means we've got time. We don't need to be in a mad rush to implement all these policies in 8 years. I think we can accomplish anything in this industry with innovation, quite frankly. When I saw how much horizontal multi-stage fracking transformed the industry, I learned about in 2009. By 2014, it totally upended both the oil and gas markets. Yeah. Change can happen fast, but not this fast. And so give me to 2050, fair enough. I think we can come up with the technologies, but 2030, my goodness, I'm not sure how we're going to get there.
Well, the whole point is one of the aspects that I've argued with, and again, you can't fight City Hall. If enough people believe that, it doesn't really matter what I think, right? It's the nature of politics. But the idea that you can starve the industry for cash and have it improve itself and clean up after itself on ever diminishing amounts of internal cash flow. I mean, nobody has really thought this through. Everybody said, well, what about your asset retirement obligations? What we're going to do, first of all, we're going to take all your money through the fossil fuel divestment movement, ESG. And then we're going to ask you, and in the meantime, we want you to go out of the business gracefully. So we don't want to say, we'd rather you got to clean up all your assets after yourself. And so nobody has really thought this through. So I think if we can have the industries mean and lean, I feel sorry for all the people that have lost their jobs in the G&A, but the fact is the industry is more efficient than it's ever been. Commodity prices are reasonable. People can service their capital, pay their debts. They can hopefully get on with reserve replacement. But more importantly, they've got the free cash to go tackle these challenges. And so if we can be in an environment where we have the commodity prices are high enough that we can meet the needs of all the stakeholders, we can do some beautiful work here without going out of the business. Because again, I do not believe there's the substitutes, the chink in the armor that you could make plastic out of solar panels. I mean, if you didn't have massive energy ignorance and voter ignorance, you could never possibly have sold that rendition of the world's energy future. So,
let me get one last comment from you, pontificating on Steve Allen's public inquiry. It comes out. I think you and I both heard T.L. Nemeth give presentations.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
Two of her studies form, I think, the foundation for what Steve Allen discovered. And I'll tell you my takeaway, and then you tell me yours, because this is going to finally be revealed today. The question will be, what comes of it? What came of it for me was, holy Dinah, are we ever getting outmaneuvered on our messaging? And we need to replicate what it is that they are doing on the environmental side to provide some balance. I don't believe that you crush the speech that you don't want to hear. There may be some issues that we have to deal with charitable tax credits going to environmental groups that are clearly getting funded by nefarious U.S. foundations whose agenda I'm not entirely clear on. But generally speaking, what I came away with that is we starve our advocacy groups, the groups that I know of who are doing some great work, whether it's Canada Action or Canadian Energy Citizens or Modern Miracle Network. They have got nothing on the environmental groups when it comes to money, but that's on us. Why don't we fund those kinds of efforts? That's my takeaway. Having seen some of the early reports that went into this inquiry, what do you think you'll be looking for?
I've managed to kill some interviews with people about what do you think, whenever this has come up. And foreign interference with the affairs of another country you're not supposed to do that. I mean, if you look at what they did, this has been my standard answer. Look what they did to Trump when it was thought that the Russians, or look what happened in the States when they thought the Russians interfered. And so the problem that I have with the mandate of the foreign funding is it amplified. I didn't think Canadians hated us that much. I didn't, what I'm saying? I don't think that there were enough Canadians alone unhappy with pipelines and the oil sands and all the issues that came up, and the Indigenous rights and all the things that were funded. They amplified something. It was there, obviously. They used Canadian conduits, and there's lots of Canadians concerned about this. But I believe the voice was amplified beyond what real Canadians felt. And a lot of public opinion surveys have supported this. You do a straw poll among the average Canadian. How many people support pipelines? Most of them, even in Quebec. Yeah, we like pipelines. What's wrong with pipelines? Beats tankers. So you get the public view, and then you get the political answer, and then you get the media story, and they're different. So my point about the inquiry, and I've supported it, is here it is. There was I've seen the website from the tar sands campaign. I've seen the people brag about the 2015 election. We beat the Liberal or the Conservatives in 21 seats of that lead now or wherever that is. And then I've read the tar sands campaign, and there's a U.S. websites bragging about the degree. I've seen Bill McKibben triumphantly say how we killed Energy East. These are foreign. They're not from our country. And so I ask it, and people say, what do you think? I said, well, I tell them what I think. I tell them what I just told you. Does that matter to you? It matters to me. I don't think that's right. So if it's out there, and if nobody cares, well, then so be it. But let's get it out there. Let's peel back the onion and see what he comes up with. So
I can't wait to see it. I think you're right. I guess the question I have is what can be done about it, because that's always the question. Whether it's the equalization referendum, woohoo, glad it passed, but what is practically going to be done about it? We do see that there's already columnists saying it should just be ignored, and that's what I'm worried about with this inquiry. Is it comes out, we know it, but does it end up getting ignored, or is there anything practical?
Those that hate it already are on the record as hating it. Those that like it will nod. It's apparently it's quite voluminous.
All right.
Well, I
gotta defer till next week to do a full segment on it, which I will. So.
Apparently it'll be out later today. But no, I look forward to it. It was too bad it took so long. Don't have any idea what's in it other than directionally. They're going to investigate this. I do like the tax aspects that Vivian Krause, among others, have been trying to raise. That the tax laws are pretty loose on accepting foreign money to influence Canadian affairs. But that's been we did that with television. With I Love Lucy and the CRTC. So maybe the nature of the country is to be protected from this because of the geography is impossible. So.
Well, Dave, we have so many issues to talk about. I'm so delighted you were able to spend so much time with us. Thank you, as always, for your analysis.
Yeah, good fun.
I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day. See you soon.
You too. That's Dave Yager, who is an energy policy analyst, as you heard, principal at Winterhawk, which does abandonment services, as well as the author of From Miracle to Menace, Alberta Carbon Story. As I mentioned, of course, the Steve Allen report is coming out later today, probably by noon. If it's voluminous, it might take us a little bit of time to go through it, but I promise you I will I'll devote a segment to it. We'll have to figure out how to do that. I should mention next week, we already have, I think we're going to defer next week or modify the time for the podcast. I might have to do one with TL Nemeth. But what is happening next week on October the 28th at about this time is I'll be moderating a session looking at the Quebec decision. We were all anticipating it. Eric Duhem will be one of the guests. He is the leader of the Conservative Party in Quebec. Yes, there is one. We also have Pierre Poilievre, who's also a very popular choice to weigh in on these issues. So go online and check it out. I'll be moderating it on behalf of Canada Strong and Free. It'll be a national audience, and we'll see if we can make some movement on that. Thank once again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.